Hello class, so today we're going to look at content analysis. We are still in quantitative research, but this is a good in between quantitative and qualitative. So the purpose of content analysis is that content analysis is a way of looking at categories or texts and making inferences about communication messages. So the idea of content analysis is this. You find a text of some kind and you're interested in what is the content of this text and what's a way to quantify the appearance of certain things in that text. So like in a radio ad, for example, or a commercial, you're interested in the content of what's in that commercial or in the content of what's in that newspaper article. And you want to find a way to systematically talk about some recurring categories or themes or ideas that appear in that text. So for this week, you're going to be doing a miniature content analysis. And so you're going to want to have some kind of objective or a research question. So usually when we do content analysis, there's usually a question that we're trying to answer, and it's usually an RQ, but it can be a prediction if you think you have some kind of theory that can predict what kind of content might appear in a commercial ad or in a political ad, for example. So for this week, you actually have an example of an actual study that uses content analysis. I figured it would be a good visualization. Now, there's 3 research questions in the study, and the study is about basically tweets and whether people, when they tweet, when they do politically oriented tweets. So first you have to categorize, is the tweet liberal, conservative, or neutral? The study is about what do people do in these tweets. So one question is there a relationship between the political orientation of a message, liberal or conservative, and the use of neutral ideological content sources on the web? So one question they want to know is, when you post, say, when somebody tweets a liberal message, for example, do they tend to use neutral sources when they tweet links, or do they tend to use other kinds of sources? So this is more of a predictive relationship type question, but I still think it's interesting. Now there is an RQ1 in the study, and you'll see it. We're going to ignore that one because that one's social network analysis, and we just don't have time to cover anything like that this semester. But RQ3 then is, what types of information sources do Twitter users post hyperlinks to? So this is a good content analysis question as well, because what it's asking is, when we read tweets, what kinds of sources tend to get picked, okay? So it's asking us to count something or to identify what is in the content of this message and how often does it appear, okay? So this study is looking at these 2 things that are good for content analysis. So you want to know the content of a message. In this case, they want to know, do certain kinds of politically oriented tweets, do they tend to give neutral or other liberal or conservative or politically oriented sources in the content of their message? And also, what kind of topics do people tweet about in these messages? So when you do content analysis, you want to make sure that you pick a good sample. Now, the key thing to sampling is that it needs to be systematic in how and why you collect the data. So the first thing is, whenever you do a research question, you should always have a population in mind. So if you want to do tweets of college students, for example, or Facebook status updates of college students, then you want to make sure that the Facebook status updates that you pick are representative of college students. In content analysis, you generally do large sample sizes, and usually, depending on the nature of the text, see, tweets are really short. So in the study that they conducted, in the example study, they did over 500 tweets, okay, or 500 accounts, I believe. And so you're doing at least 100, right? Now for this week, we're not going to do that many, but you want to have a large sample size. It also needs to cover your topic area, so that means whatever you pick your content analysis on, it needs to help address your question. And then you also want to be clear about a time period too. So at what point how recent or how new is the material that you're going to analyze. So for example, if you're going to do political ads, what is the content of Donald Trump political ads or something like that? It's important to establish a time period because political ads can change if you consider the campaign 6 months ago to now. So you want to be able to justify the time period of messages that you are analyzing because things can change over time. So common things that you can sample in content analysis, commercials, right? And so you can do TV commercials, and in which case you'd probably want to make a transcript of it, and you might be interested in like how long something takes, like 15 seconds of the 30-second commercial is dedicated to this. Newspapers are great because they're textual. Social media activity, so you can do tweets, you can do Facebook updates. If you do Yik Yak, you can do that. You can do all kinds of different social media sites, and you can do content analysis on those. Interview transcripts are also good. So if you were to interview people, the best way to analyze the data is to transcribe it and then work with the text from there. So in this case, what they did in the study was they used a software to help them pick it. It was called Node Excel. It's for Microsoft Excel. You don't need to worry about software. You don't need to worry about that. But what the point is that they picked 500 Twitter users who posted a message using political keywords, okay? And the content of their most recent tweet is in which the keyword was used. So 500 Twitter users who posted politically oriented messages is what they decided to sample. So it's large, it's representative of the population because these are political. They want to know about the political scheme, so it covers their topic area, and it's their most recent, so it's within an established time period. So generally when you do content analysis, you want to make sure that it meets those things. And in this case, it's social media activity. So actually, this should be 3. Oh, I made a mistake. Okay. So there's 3 parts to analysis. So I'll just make this 3. See, got to proofread. All right, 3 parts of analysis. So there's 3 parts when you do content analysis. So let's just review. So before you even get to the analysis, you got to first come up with a research question, right? So what is it that you're interested in? And what exactly is it, the text that you want to analyze, okay? And then secondly, you got to figure out your sample, all right? So a big sample, something that's representative to help you answer your research question, and a kind of text. Once you've done that, now you can start thinking about analysis. So there's 3 parts to that. The first part is the unit of analysis. So what you have to be clear about is the specific element that you're analyzing in the data. So what do we mean? So for example, are you interested in physical distinctions? So in this case, you're looking at content in terms of physicality. So you might be interested in how much space does political commentary get in city newspapers. So then you're interested in amount of space, you see. So what you're going to be counting is column inches in the newspaper. So you're going to look for politically oriented messages in newspapers, and you're going to measure how much space do these take up, for example. Or if it was a commercial, you might do time. So what you might do is say, how much time does a political commercial spend talking about, I don't know, the economy, right? So you'll take a sample of political commercials maybe in the past week, and you'll time the amount of time that they spend talking about, the economy. You also have syntactical distinctions. So here, you're looking at bits of information, so individual words or phrases within sentences, okay? So for example, let's say there's a word that you're interested in. So I'm interested in how often the word national security appears in newspaper ads about Barack Obama. So what you're going to do is you're going to get a sample of newspapers, and you're going to count how frequently the word national security comes up when there's articles talking about Obama. So this would also be a good place, like maybe an interesting one would be how often does the word race come up in talks about Barack Obama, or maybe with Bernie Sanders, how often does his religion come up? So maybe Judaism, something like that. That would be a syntactical distinction because you're looking at bits of information, which are either individual words or phrases within sentences. You can do categorical distinctions. So these are segments of text that share some important objective aspect, and that's the key. So you might be interested in how many articles in a newspaper are written by actual medical doctors, like let's say in the health section, okay? Or something that is sort of objective, or how many, maybe like in TV commercials, how many sports commercials show women, okay? Something like that, or have women in them. Then you have propositional distinctions, and these look at sentence clauses as the basic units of analysis. So you're looking at whole entire sentences, and you're basically looking for like a theme of some kind. So how many tweets on Twitter were expressions of anger towards Apple? Okay, so you're not just looking for a word, you're looking at entire tweets. Okay, so you're looking at the whole proposition as in its entirety, and you're going, okay, how many of these were expressions of anger, okay, or something like that. And then you have thematic distinctions, and this is where you're looking at topics within textual units, multiple sentences, paragraphs, and you're coming up with particular themes that these talk about that aren't necessarily explicit. So for example, you might look at parents' emails to students or professors' emails to students, and you'll look at the emails and you'll be interested in, for example, what kinds of supportive messages do professors put in their emails to students? And so you're going to come up with themes. Well, one kind of supportive message is greeting with friendliness, okay? And then so you'll find an email, like you'll see emails where like they're like, hello, Chris, with an exclamation point, and you might call that greeting with friendliness. And then you might have another theme in the email, like, you know, closing with friendliness. Hope you have a great day. So then you're looking at emails that have that kind of thing. The idea is that these are themes, right? These are themes that you're coming up with to try to explain a question, which is different kinds of supportive messages in an email. So the key thing is sometimes these distinctions aren't always going to be clear, but the idea is this. What's your unit of analysis? Are you focused on physical, like space, like how much time, space something takes up? Are you interested in like pieces of words or little units of something? Are you interested in just categories that something can fall under? You know, how many health topics appear in Time magazine in the past year? That's a categorical because it's a health topic, it's a category. Propositional, are you interested in general overall utterances that people make, complaints, speech acts, promises, those kinds of things? Or are you interested in general themes that particular long messages have, okay? So it goes from very, very specific to very, very broad. So that's the idea, is where are you on that spectrum when you're analyzing data for content analysis? So once again, 3 parts of analysis. Example. So here, the RQ from the study that we looked at is, and this is that, is there a relationship between the political orientation of a message, liberal or conservative, and the use of neutral ideological content sources on the web? So in this case, the unit of analysis is probably going to be categorical, right? Because they're asking, is the political, what category does the political orientation of a message fall under? And usually that's going to be liberal or conservative. Now there's technically an argument, like I think that you could make, where maybe it's thematic. It just depends on how you feel about political categorization, if you think it's subjective or objective. So that could be acceptable as well. Either way, you're looking at the overall tone of something. And RQ2, what types of information sources do Twitter users post hyperlinks to? So in this study, they use syntactical units, right? Because what they're studying is keywords, right? And so keywords are part of a sentence. And so that's what their unit of analysis is. So they're first looking at tweets, and they're looking at what category can they fall under, or what theme, you know, however you want to put that. And they're trying to decide what's the political orientation of the message, okay? Liberal or conservative. And then they're asking what types of information sources do Twitter users post hyperlinks to. That's a look at keywords, right? Because they're asking, here are these links, and what kind of links are these? Okay, so to a government source, to a liberal source, and so forth. So they're looking at keywords there. So that's their unit of analysis in the sample study. The third part, or the second part to analysis, is the coding scheme. The coding scheme is basically how you're going to categorize everything. So these are themes, they can be called groupings, they can be called classes, they can be called types, with explicit boundaries. Okay, that means that they're mutually exclusive, into which units of content are coded for analysis. So when we say coded, we basically mean classified. So when you start looking through your tweets, how are you categorizing them? So there's two different ways to categorize. So it's kind of like, I put two kinds, but it's like two ways, right? One way is deductive, and that's where you already have pre-established categories before you even start the study. So for part of the study that we're looking at right now, liberal, conservative, neutral are deductive categories. Those are pre-existing categories that they're bringing into the study without having looked at any data. So they're going to try to fit all of the tweets that they're looking at into one of those categories that they've pre-established ahead of time. Now notice, like, a libertarian tweet would have a hard time fitting, or an anarchist tweet would have a hard time fitting if the choices are liberal, conservative, or neutral. Inductive categories go the other way. So these are categories that you create as you look at the data. So these new categories that you create would then have to be discovered, okay? And those categories should be mutually exclusive, meaning that you shouldn't have a tweet that can fall into two categories, and your categories need to be exhaustive. There can't be other tweets that are technically political but were never classifiable, okay? So when you do your content analysis, you can go either way. You can have deductive categories where you say ahead of time, these are what the categories are going to be. And usually when you do deductive categories, they are based on research. So it's not like, oh, I'm just going to make up categories because I'm lazy. There's already research out there, or there's already a general trend of categories that people use. So we're just going to use those. Inductive, you're going to have to discover those as you look at your data. So example, RQ, RQ2. And see, the technically this should be 2 and that should be 3 because I skipped RQ1, but it's cool. RQ2. Is there a relationship between the political orientation of a message, liberal conservative, and the use of neutral ideological content sources on the web? So their categories are going to be liberal, conservative, no affiliation, right? And that's deductive because they said before it even started, these are going to be the categories. What types of information sources do Twitter users post hyperlinks to? So types of information sources is going to be the category, right? And as far as I know, these were discovered. So government sites, grassroots sites, traditional media, video websites, all of these are categories too, okay? Because they're asking what types of information sources do Twitter users post hyperlinks to? These are the categories that they're going to use. So when they start going through tweets, they're first going to figure out, is the tweet liberal, conservative, or no affiliation? That's the first category. And then within that tweet, does the information that it posts, is it to our government site, grassroots site, traditional media, video website, or other? Okay? So they're classifying according to the categories or the coding scheme that they've set forth. Now the third part of analysis is then classification. And this is where you go through your data units of analysis that you've decided and putting them into the categories that you've established, like I've said. Now what you report are frequencies for how often a particular category appears in a sample. So you'll say 20 of the tweets were liberal in nature, and so 20% of them were under that category. Like of all the sample, 20% of the tweets were liberal in nature. Okay, if you had 100 tweets and 20 of them were liberal, 20% were liberal in nature. Now, you don't have to do this for your content analysis, but usually to prove what the most frequent was is you'd use a chi-square analysis, because remember chi-square is nominal on nominal data and categories are all nominal in nature. You don't have to do chi-square analysis for this, so you just have to report frequencies in a frequency table, which you'll see in a second. So here's an example. RQ2 is the relationship between political orientation of a message and the use of neutral ideological content sources on the web. So here's the quote from the study. Examining the second research question, a message was used as a unit of analysis. And so they looked at 2,278 messages. A strong relationship was found between a message's political orientation and the orientation of the context of the content it linked to. So here they ran a chi-square analysis, and so that's their statistic, and it's significant at the 0.001 level. So it's a very low chance that this was all by accident. So 81.7% of the messages with liberal political orientation linked to content with liberal political orientation. And you can see that here. So the source that's being linked and the tweet that's being looked at. So the liberal tweets, there were 218 of them that were liberal in nature and linked to a liberal source in their response or in their tweet. 75.4% of conservative messages linked to conservative content. So here, conservative tweets, 75% of them provided links to conservative websites. And 76% of messages lacking an obvious political orientation linked to content without clear political orientation. So all the neutral people who weren't liberal or conservative in their statements linked to neutral websites. So interesting. Everyone kind of clings to what they already believe for their sources. As Table 2 indicates, conservative messages were slightly more likely than liberal messages to link to sources without clear political orientation. So conservative messages were more likely than liberal messages to link to sources without clear political orientation. So conservative messages tended to use more neutral sites than liberal did. So, and you can see percentages do not add up to 100% because some could not be determined. So you can see that if you go across, they roughly add up to 100%. So all of the conservative messages, 65 of them did, or 20% of them were neutral, 3.2% of them were liberal, and 75% of them were conservative. So you look at it across. Okay? So that's how you read this kind of data whenever you have to read journal articles yourself. And that's how you read the table. So RQ3, what types of information sources do Twitter users post hyperlinks to? So let's read through this. Following the link posted in many tweets, we found that they pointed to a variety of web pages with content relevant to political talk that was examined. Only 1.5% did not. Although spam messages and links are quite common on Twitter in general, we did not identify such content in our analysis. So in the 1,232 links, 38% were directed towards websites associated with grassroots sorts of information, such as blogs operated by individuals and small groups. So you can see here, I'm trying to find it. So grassroots, where's grassroots on here? Individuals, small groups, okay? So they said 38.8% were linked towards grassroots sources of information. And then it says 30.4% to websites of traditional media, okay? So here you have traditional media. And 19.4% to websites with no offline outlets, and 4.6% to video sharing sites, and only 1.5% associated with the government, its representatives, or its candidates. So here you have the political source, the source that's being stated here, the government websites, the links, the traditional media, video websites, and here, based on what the tweet was it about the deficit, the DNC, global warming, GOP, health reform? So an example, the DNC, when there's a tweet about the DNC, it tends to be linked to websites about individuals or small groups, okay? Or it gets linked to traditional media sources or video website or online or something else, okay? So they came up with categories of topics, and then they used their categories of the sources mentioned to come up with numbers of how often. So all these numbers mean that's the frequency, so 29 of them, and that's the percentage going across. So on all 52 of the messages on deficits, 0 of them were on government websites, 29 or 55% of them were to individuals and small groups, 14 or 26.92% of them were traditional media, and so forth. So look at it once again going across. So that's how your frequency table should look when you produce it. You should have the categories and then the other category that you're working with, the number of times something appears, and the percentages going across for how often it appears. And that's pretty much all you report for a content analysis. Now, there are some things that studies or researchers do to ensure reliability. Now, you won't be able to do this for your assignment because, you know, we're just doing micro versions of this. Some people will do pilot studies, and whenever you hear the word pilot study, what it basically means is doing a trial run of a study on a smaller sample before we do the full Monty, right? So basically it's like we want to make sure our study actually works. So we're just going to do it on 10 people, make sure it works, then we'll do it on the sample of 500 or whatever. So content analysis, you might do a small sample of 50 first, see how your categories work out. And if they don't work out, fix them. But if they do, okay, great. Now we can go analyze 1,000 tweets. And then there's this other thing called intercoder reliability. So usually in content analysis, because they're striving for objectivity and proof and all that stuff, you usually have multiple people coding. So it's usually not just one researcher doing all the coding. Usually you have a team of maybe 2 or 3 other people who decide to code everything independently. And depending on your statistical measurement of agreement is how you develop reliability. So what you end up having to do is you have to coach your raters or your coders to say, okay, this is what counts as a liberal message, this is what counts as a conservative, this is what counts as a neutral. And what you want to happen is you want your coders to be able to agree most of the time what counts as liberal, what counts as conservative, what counts as neutral, okay? And when your coders are agreeing, you have intercoder reliability. If they're agreeing, that means your criteria must be clear. You must have very objective criteria because people can agree. The less clear your criteria are, the more disagreement you have, the less reliability you have, and therefore the more subjective, in quotes, your study is. And you can do statistical analysis to prove intercoder reliability. Usually it's Cohen's kappa, that's Cohen's kappa right here, the K, or Scott's pi. But I mostly see Cohen's kappa, but the study that for the example, is Scott's pi. Now you don't have to worry about either of these for your assignment. Just focus on research question, getting a good sample, having good categories, and a coding scheme, and classifying and reporting the frequencies of your data and providing a good analysis of what the takeaway is. So you'll have the example study to look at just to kind of help illustrate a lot of this. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Content analysis is a great foundation for getting into qualitative analysis. So I hope you enjoy it.